Okay. All right. So I have to confess that, I've gone to prepare the message or the message for today, and I got jammed up a little bit. I don't know if you know this, but I've got this tendency to want to do everything perfectly. And if it doesn't come out the first time perfectly, then I get blocked up, and I get this anxiety thing that happens, and that's one of the things that the Lord is dealing with me with and working with me with. In a few minutes, I'm going to tell some bit of my own story, and how God has been faithful to me, and how God has been faithful to us over and over again in this most recent season that's been the last 4 years. Before we get to that, though, we're also going to do something a little bit differently at the end. So I'm not going to tell you what it is, though. So we're going to continue a little bit in the spirit that Joy and David were talking about, and we've been talking about for this past few weeks of worshiping in spirit and truth. Right? So we said that God is spirit, and when we worship, when we worship when we connect with Him in spirit and truth. When we connect, I think we have a deep desire to connect with something. Right? We all have a deep desire to connect with something. Sometimes, hopefully, it's with the Lord. Sometimes it's with something else. But I think God made our hearts deep within that has a deep desire to connect to something. A lot of times we connect with things that aren't necessarily healthy for us, or even healthy for the body of Christ. But we've got a deep desire to connect, and that's what God's given us. We said that the thing is that each one of us is made with the desire to connect, or the ability to connect with God. And when we connect with Him out of who we really are, that's when we worship in spirit and truth. Not connect with Him out of who we pretend to be, because we have a tendency to do that. I'll confess I was doing that today. Right? So I came in here and I was prepping the message a little bit, kind of tying it up at the end, and gosh, it's got to be perfect, it's got to be right, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. But this week has not been a great week for me. It just hasn't been a great week personally. I feel like, I wasn't connecting with the Lord the way that I wanted to connect. I didn't get up a couple mornings. I didn't spend time with Him the way that I wanted to spend with Him. And so here I am, in the middle of the day on a Sunday, trying to prepare this message, talking about worshiping in spirit and truth. And I felt this, Kevin, who are you? You don't have to pretend in front of, it's just us, right? It's just us. You don't have to pretend in front of everybody. You don't have to say, well, here's how you do it. You didn't do it this week. That's okay. That's okay. But you can do it now. So we worship Him, as a result, we worship Him when we worship in spirit and truth. God is spirit, and we worship well with Him when we connect with Him in truth. When we connect with Him out of the truth of who we are. He knows anyway, doesn't He? Instead, we rush around like chickens with our heads cut off. We're busy. Ask anybody, how are you doing? Oh, busy. That's what everybody says. Or we live in our heads. Right? We live in our heads, trying to figure out how we're going to get from one place to the next. How are we going to get the thing done that we need to get done? And we're stressed out. And there's so little of the peace that Jesus promised. See, I think that we should be the most happy people and the most joyful people in the world.
Amen.
In the world. You heard testimonies today about what God has done. Savannah talked about God raising $5,000 like that, instantly. Lynn talking about what's happened up in Benton Mountain. Young man coming to Jesus. Is it the man or the woman? The man. You've seen him provide for you over and over and over and over again. And over. The encouragement just when we need it. Financial help just when we need it. But yet we tend to live out of that stress, don't we? A lot of times. That's the stuff that we believe, at least. At least I do sometimes. Until I come to the end of myself. So the passage from John 4 that we've been referring to, it says in verse 19, the woman said to him, talking to Jesus, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship now what you do not know. We worship what we do know, what we know. For salvation is from the Jews, but an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. What does that mean for you, worshiping in spirit and truth? Anybody?
It means if you're doing it another way, you're kind of falling short of his highest desire, or that maturity in Christ that maybe Joy was talking about. That's a tough one to.
Okay. Anybody else?
It's not about where, it's about how, it's not whether on this mountain or on that mountain, it's how we worship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else?
Talking about the truth? Is that the question?
Yeah.
That you're worshiping the revealed God, not the God of your imagination.
Okay. Lynn?
The Holy Spirit that's within us is worshiping the Spirit, which is, it's a connection that's beyond anything we can describe. It's really, we're worshiping the Spirit that dwells within us because it's the Spirit.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's good.
We started a thing here. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, in spirit is our connection with the Lord. In truth is the reality of who he is, because he's the one worthy of worship. Who I am is not worthy of worship.
Mm-hmm.
And we have that kind of stuff straight,
Mm-hmm.
so that I can appreciate him for who he is.
Mm-hmm. So I'll confess something. So earlier today, I came in here, and so I'm talking about worshiping in spirit and truth. And so, I've heard of people, I think maybe a month or a few months ago, we tried this thing. We kind of called it, open, what did we call it? Open prayer, open worship or something like that. And what was it, Jordan, we called it? I would start singing something, and then other people would start singing in maybe a different song, that kind of thing. But it was beautiful, right?
Yeah,
But
I think I've heard people call it like a free sing.
Yeah, like a free sing.
But free sing, yeah, but I don't know if there's a name for it. Yeah, I
So,
know what you're saying.
yeah, so I came in here this morning, and I stood right up here, and I had no music, so I felt really awkward. And I started dancing, right? Now, how many people love to dance? How many of you like to dance? I love to dance. I love to dance. When I was in college, we used to go to this place called the Varsity Grill. I went to the University of Maryland, and it was called the Varsity Grill. You couldn't go to the Rendezvous Inn because you couldn't leave there because your feet would stick to the ground after you left. And so people that went to the VU, the Rendezvous Inn, you had to wear your VU shoes when you went to the VU because you had to be prepared to leave them there. Never went there. I never went there. I went to the grill because the grill, you could dance all night, and it was awesome. And then you just felt just this freedom in dancing, but I don't feel any other way than when I'm maybe singing, but definitely dancing. I feel this freedom when I'm dancing. And so I stood up here, and I'm listening carefully for Robin and Jordan's door because I don't want them coming out looking at me. And I'm watching the door because Evan's about, right? And I don't want him kind of looking at me. But I'm like, no, you just dance. So I start dancing. I just start dancing. I'm moving around. I start jumping around a little bit, and I'm lifting my hands. And then I came up with this song, maybe it was Hallelujah or something. And I just start singing, and I'm dancing, and I'm singing, and I'm dancing, and it felt great. It felt like, I'm not tied by what I look like or what somebody else thinks I should sound like or anything like that. I don't even know if I'm on tune, and I know I can't dance. Right? I know I can't dance. But it felt great just to stand up here and sing and dance and feel like, you know what, it just doesn't matter. I'm just here with you. I felt grateful. When I dance, I feel grateful. There's a lightness in my spirit. I wish we would do it more here. And we just get up and dance. But there's a lightness in my spirit. So we just came from a sacred assembly. For those of you that weren't here, based on the teachings in Joel, we kind of had a time where we kind of drew apart, and we're recognizing that God is preparing us and bringing us through a season of pruning because he wants to do something. He wants to do something in the body of our church. We just finished that. We talked about how God's pruning us to take a hold of something that he's uniquely designing our body to do. But I think that sacred assembly was just the beginning. I mean, it was one event. We had it on one particular day, but I don't think it's over. I think it's continuing. I think it's continuing because the transformation hasn't happened yet, or is in the process of happening. What I think he is in the process of doing is turning us into truly grateful people. Because when we're not grateful, we complain, we whine, we live out of our own head, we're stressed out. I'm not minimalizing stressful things and difficult things that happen in our lives. Because we've all got something going on, all of us. Guarantee you. But I think that he wants to move us into becoming a grateful people. Because I believe that when we become a grateful people, then we worship in spirit and truth. We have the capacity to open up our hands to dance like nobody's looking and to enjoy him in a way that we can't otherwise. That's what I think. I watched Brian singing when we had our 24-hour burn a couple weeks ago, and it was just wonderful to watch him singing and praising as if nobody's looking, don't care. That's how I think he wants us. I think he wants us to be grateful people because we've got so much to be grateful about. Instead, I think what we run into is that we are involved in some things that have become normal in our society, even our Christian society, that probably shouldn't be normal. Joy talked a while ago about, or no, I think it was Dave, talked about dishonor, honor and dishonor. I think we have a culture now that does not honor. I don't think we honor our elders. I don't think we honor each other. And I think we suffer from that. I think we have a sense of entitlement. Now, we've always had it, right? When I came out of college, people thought, hey, I want a job making $100,000 right out of college. Guess what? It's not going to happen, right? But now you look at, and I don't think the idea has changed. It's just come out, so you see it a little bit stronger. But we have this sense that, well, I shouldn't have to work for that, or I shouldn't have to do that. I work for a company that I learned early that there's no such thing as that ain't my job. But we live in a culture of that ain't my job, I think. But that's not how we intended it. How we speak to one another. Yeah, we kid and we chide each other and we have fun with one another. But how we speak to each other is important. Talked about high levels of stress. ADHD. Like every other kid has ADHD now. And I'm not cutting on, I was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD. Right? Probably about 5 years ago or so. I was diagnosed with ADHD. But everybody's got ADHD now. We've got, go to a restaurant, and everybody's like this, right? Got whole families that are like this. We should be the most grateful people in the world. I want to tell you a brief story of what got me or is getting me to the point of being grateful. Because it's been a long road, right? But again, my story is probably more difficult than yours. So I got laid off in 2014 for a job that I had for 14 years in an industry that I'd worked for 24 years. And I was a dedicated and hard worker. I traveled a lot. I'd go wherever the company wanted me to go within a day's notice. And sometimes I literally worked around the clock. My most embarrassing stint was leaving at 6:15 a.m. so that people coming in the next day wouldn't know that I was still there. Going home and taking a shower and then coming back and, oh, hey, I'm here. Well, I've been there all night, working. The worst week that I had, I worked 93 hours one week, just before going on vacation. And I'm not glamorizing that. The story, the highlight isn't in the story, oh, look how bad it was. It's not that at all. It is look what God has done, and look what God is doing to make me a grateful person. So I got laid off, and that was like getting hit by a freight train. And we spent through I got severance pay for 6 months, and we managed to make it work for 9 months. And Sherry started working for a consignment store here in Oak Grove. And we were here going to this church, and we were over in the other building. And I got an offer from them. They said, well, we don't really, we can't pay you what you need, but we can pay you $10 an hour. And grateful for the opportunity, I took it. So after I started working for them, and I think I was after about, I'd worked for that first 9 months for an insurance company, and that didn't go well. I don't sell insurance well. So I started working for the consignment store, and we eventually bought the store. And as you know, we went out of business about 3 years later, which was difficult in and of itself. Crazy difficult. Mostly because we'd spent that whole 2-3 year period working like crazy and barely making any money for ourselves. Store did well. Store paid for itself. It just didn't pay us. So I don't say that to glamorize that story. What I use it for is to show how God provided. Because I want to point out 2 stories in particular here. We were coming to this church, and we were working in the store. And this was in the midst of one of these times where we weren't making any money. I mean, we'd have periods of time, honestly, where we had almost no food in the fridge. Most of you don't know that. But we almost had no food in the fridge. And there were a couple days where I didn't eat. But I'm going to church one day when we were in the other building, and I'm driving on the way there, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, God, help, help. I mean, I'm just at my wit's end, I'm screaming, right? I'm not angry, and I'm literally saying, God, you have provided for others. I've seen it, I've heard about it, I've heard the stories. Help. I've heard them. And so I go to church, and I sit up front, or not sit up front, I do worship, I play something in worship, and I sit down next to Sherry, and I look over at her, and she shows me a check for $1,500. We didn't ask anybody for it, but one of you, and you know who you are, heard God say, they need some help. That paid for my mortgage that next month. I'm grateful. So toward the end of the store, you know, we're working like crazy. I mean, working like crazy. We're working some days 7 days a week. And you take it home with you. You know, for any of you that's been in business for yourself, know you don't leave it there. You take it home with you. And it stays with you. And I'm working this thing as hard as I can. We reorganized the store. We made it look pretty. We did this. We did that. We hired somebody to come in and help us with the organization and to make it look pretty. We did everything we could possibly think of, and the money kept going down, down and to the right. That's the direction that you don't want. And it had been doing it probably the 2 or 3 years, actually no more, about like 4 or 5, before we even bought the store. We thought that we could turn it around. So we're near the end, and someone comes in, someone from this body comes in and says, Kevin, it's time. It's time. And I'm like, no, we can work a little bit harder. We can do this, we can do that, we can change this a little bit. I'm thinking of changing this around or doing that. I don't remember what it was, but I had some plan, and he said, no, it's time. You're killing yourself. And of course, I disagreed a couple more times. And he said, no, you're done. And I've got your mortgage for the next 3 months. Does God provide? Those are all stories that always happen to somebody else, in my mind, right? And before you think this is just financial, we had more people praying for us. We had somebody coming in the store every week, just about, and praying for our store, your mom. and praying for us. And we had other people calling us, encouraging us. There was other financial support. And we made it through. And we closed it in November 30th, which is exactly the worst time to look for a job. I had sent a resume over to a company and not thinking that anything would happen. In the meantime, David came and said, I'd like you to join me in our church and help out at church. And I said, with pleasure, because this is the body that cared for me. This is my path. I got that other job too. And they were willing to take me when I offered and told them, look, I'm not leaving the church. If I'm going to work here, I have to work 3 days a week. And they said, sure. Which is unheard of in this industry. So why do I say all that? This is what God has done to bring me to be grateful. I still struggle. I still have issues. I still have things that go on. I still have things that are broken, not fixed. I stress out more than I should. But God is making me the most grateful person on the planet. He says in Revelation, blessed are those, Blessed are those who, I can't think of it now. Hopefully I wrote it down. What the Beatitudes? Blessed are, no, it wasn't that one. It was, yeah, I think it's the first one. Not hunger and thirst. It was the one that essentially says, blessed is he that knows he has no other plan. No other plan, not only to provide for himself financially or emotionally, but also just sustaining and going on. That's blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So this is what God had to do. He had to wrestle me out of my job, send me to an insurance company, which I hate insurance, send me to work in a consignment store, and I'm not about stuff. I don't like stuff. I like people and information. So that he could bring me to the point of gratitude. Being thankful. Because I believe that when we get to the point where we are grateful, do we understand? Because one day I was driving somewhere, and I had this revelation that God loves me deeply. And we've all had that. It's almost like, we hear it every day, and so it falls into disuse. It falls into not understanding the depth of it. But for some reason that day it hit me. And I thought, and I even said out loud, I said, but God, you know me. Why on earth would you love me? And it wasn't out of this false, poor me, why do you love me, that kind of thing. No, it was like, no, you know me. You've walked with me for a long time. And when I start to understand that, And maybe I don't feel so ridiculous coming up here and dancing in the middle of the floor. Because of what he's done for me, what he continues to do for me, and what he will do for me. Because I am one who can't do it for himself. I mean, he's given me abilities, he's given me skills, he's given me gifts, he wants me to use them, but he wants me to do it the way that he wants me to do it, not the way that I want me to do it. And I was killing myself at that company, working round the clock, trying to do it the way that I felt like I should do it. It says in Romans 12:1, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. The pattern of this world says you need to have the same thing your neighbor has. Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking stuff. I'm not saying that, if you live in a big house, then you're condemned. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, when that stuff, when the stuff means more to you, when the looking right, I don't know what it is. I mean, for you, it's probably something different than it is for me. I like to, this is terrifying to me, honestly. This right here is terrifying to me. Because I don't like speaking in public. Thank you. Thank you. I don't like it because I feel like I'm going to get up here and look like an idiot. But that can't matter. It just can't matter more than saying what God has for me to say. It just can't. Because if it does, then I'm conforming to the pattern of this world that says I need to look a certain way, feel a certain way, drive a certain car, live in a certain neighborhood, etc., etc. That can't be it. That can't be what Jesus and the disciples flung themselves at the world for. So what God did was to say, no, you're done. He gave me 3 shots to try to figure it out on my own, right? He sent 3 different people. You've heard that in the movies, right? Is there always what's the Scrooge story? There's past, present, future, right? There's always 3. Well, there really were 3. And the last one showed up in my office and said, after he had watched me teach something, he showed up in my office without having talked to me and said, where have you gone and how do we get you back? And then he sat in my office and prayed with me for 2 hours. So the Lord said, I'm done. You're done with that. I need to make you grateful. I am I mean, I don't always come across that way, but I am grateful. I am grateful because God is doing things in my life. He's helping me. He's doing the work of do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. Because I don't care what the company thinks of me. I leave at 6 o'clock, by 6, every day. Most of the time, I don't even take my laptop home with me. And that's new. That's because of what God has done. I said I was going to do something a little different. I desperately think that we need to start with gratitude. We can't, you can't will yourself into gratitude. You can't, oh, I'm going to be thankful. Oh, right? We can't. It just doesn't work that way because something comes along that knocks us out of it. I had a pastor once that said, you can't feel your way into an action, but you can act yourself into a feeling. I found that to be true. So what I choose to do, on many nights, not all, is to keep a list. In AA, they call it a gratitude list. For any of you that's been to AA, they call it a gratitude list. And it's just a listing of the things that you're thankful for. Why? Is that going to inoculate you against everything else? No, it's a reminder, because we forget. We're forgetful people. I forget what I did yesterday. I forget the sins that I did yesterday and do the same thing today. Right? Because I'm forgetful. So for the alcoholic, it's important to remember what you're grateful for. Because today is going to bring another whole set of challenges. And I need to look at that list. Because I need to remember that I'm grateful and that God has done something that I could not do for myself. So I have cards. I want you to spend, what time is it? 6? 10 minutes. If you have a pen, share it. I have a handful. We're going to write gratitude lists. What are you grateful for? Yeah, would you please?
I'll take that, sir.
That's not enough. I'll get some more.
I don't know if we need that many.
Okay. Yeah, you just pan them back.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you know, I recognize that some of you may have come today and your life, you feel like your life stinks right now, and you may be going through some difficulty. Then be grateful that you got here. Be grateful that there's air conditioning in this building. And then when you go home, take your list and put it somewhere where you can see it. And then add to it every day. Got pens. For those of you who need pens. Anybody need pen? Who needs a pen? If it doesn't work, then just ask me for another one. Hey, behind you. Sorry. Anyone else need a pen? Just take a couple. That's right. I got it. Here, just hand them. This is not an exercise in being Pollyanna. It's not an exercise in, oh, I'm going to smile and say everything's nice and everything's fine. Because we all know that it's not. It's an exercise in, what am I grateful for? And how do I let what I'm grateful for, here, you need another pen? If it's not working, then ask God to help you, to guide you into seeing him more closely, because he's given all of us so much. It's time to be grateful. I would challenge you to put down maybe 5 to 7 things. If you can't come up with it, then take it home with you.